Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sleepless Stories, where we wander gently through forgotten worlds and whispering tales that drift like soft moonlight through your thoughts. Tonight's story is a calm journey through the mists of time, a tale filled with soft wind, ancient stone, and the quiet hush of mysteries left unsolved. This story is designed to help your mind unwind, your body relax, and your thoughts slow down like falling feathers. Whether you're here to fall asleep or simply to rest your eyes and enjoy the journey, you are welcome. You are safe, and you're not alone. If you enjoy our soothing adventures, don't forget to click subscribe and turn on the little bell so you'll never miss a nighttime escape. Your support helps keep these stories alive and traveling softly into the night. Now, settle into your bed, take a deep breath, let the world outside fade, and let the story begin. The sky was already beginning to darken when Elias stepped off the slow-moving train onto the sleepy platform of Marduin, a mountain town so quiet it felt like the world had forgotten it. Moss-covered stone buildings leaned gently under the weight of age, and the crisp air smelled faintly of pine, dust, and something older like parchment left too long in a wooden drawer. Elias took a long breath, the kind that fills you up from the inside and settles gently into your chest. He wasn't entirely sure why he had come to Marduin. The letter had been unsigned, written in an ink that shimmered like silver when it caught the light. It said only, "The Moon Temple waits. Follow the lines on the map. Trust what the silence tells you." Inside the letter had been a piece of what looked like ancient cloth. Torn along the edges, its surface etched with careful lines, part map, part dream. He had stared at it for days, wondering why someone would send such a thing to an aging history professor from a coastal university, someone who had long ago stopped seeking adventure and had made peace with quiet halls, yellowed books, and echoing lecture rooms. But something had pulled at him, something soft, insistent, and oddly familiar. The Moon Temple. He had never heard of it. Not in his studies, not in his years of poring over texts and records. And yet, the name curled around his thoughts like a song he couldn't quite remember. Now, the hush of Marduin wrapped around him as he stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the small inn marked on the corner of the parchment. The map led him there, its ink glowing faintly in the dusk. The inn was a crooked little place with a sloping roof and windows that flickered warmly from within. Inside, it smelled of old wood, thyme, and something baking. A woman behind the counter looked up from a book and smiled as he entered. "Elias," she said gently, as if reading his name from the air. He stopped, startled. "Yes? I've been expecting you," she said. Her voice was kind, low, and had a sleepy quality, like she'd just woken from a dream and wasn't in a rush to leave it. He didn't ask how she knew his name. Somehow, it didn't seem strange here. "I have your room ready, and a kettle warming by the fire." He followed her up the narrow stairs to a room that overlooked the hills. The sun had just dipped behind the ridge, and the sky was fading into lilac and velvet. On the desk by the window was a small envelope, his name again written in that shimmering ink. This time, the note was brief. "The first key is silence. Listen closely. You will hear her." That night, Elias lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind slide past the window. It whispered like voices just beyond the edge of hearing. The kind of sound that makes you feel like the world is speaking just for you. Or maybe, to you, He dreamt of silver pathways beneath the earth, of moons carved in stone, and of a temple hidden in mist. A woman stood at the center of it all, her face turned toward the sky. She said nothing, but her silence wrapped around him like music. When he awoke, the map was glowing faintly on the desk, and the first line was now complete. The morning light in Marduin was pale and cool, drifting gently through lace curtains as if afraid to wake the room too quickly. Elias dressed quietly, the weight of the parchment map tucked into his coat pocket. The glow had faded with the sunrise, but the inked path remained etched now in soft silver thread that hadn't been there before. The woman at the front desk, whose name he had never learned, handed him a woven satchel. "Herbs, tea, bread, and a bit of honey," she said. "You'll want something warm when you reach the Vale." He blinked at her. "How do you—" She only smiled. "It's better not to ask too many questions where the Moon Temple is concerned." And with that, she returned to her book, as if their conversation had been no more unusual than the weather. Elias stepped out into the morning. The path from the map led away from the town, to the old pinewood trail that wound its way up the hills like a soft ribbon. The trees stood tall and hushed, their trunks covered in velvet moss. Birds chirped softly, but even their sounds felt gentle rounded at the edges, as though they too knew not to wake the ancient stillness that lived in this place. Hours passed. Time seemed slower here, the way it does in dreams or childhood summers. He passed a stone bridge where the map told him to stop. There, nestled under the rocks, he found a second piece of the cloth map, wrapped in waxed paper and tied with moon thread. This piece had a single word written on it: "Remember." He paused on a mossy boulder and opened the parcel slowly. His fingers brushed the cloth like it was something sacred. And then, like the shifting of a breeze, he heard it. Not a voice, not a word, but a memory. His mother, telling him stories of places hidden in the stars, of moonlight trails that only opened when you closed your eyes, of women with silver eyes and temples made of silence. She had always said, "The most powerful stories are the ones we dream while we're awake." Elias blinked, and for just a moment, he swore he saw her standing beneath the trees, smiling gently, then gone. The valley below opened like a cradle. Fog curled lazily over the meadow like a sigh. At its center, a single stone arch stood half buried, broken, and ancient. The Moon Temple, or its gate. He stepped through, and the air changed. It was not colder, not warmer, just deeper, like stepping into a thought older than language. And though no one was there, Elias felt utterly seen. Elias stepped carefully beyond the broken arch, his boots soft on the dew-damp grass. The air was filled with a kind of hush-not silence, exactly, but a stillness so deep it felt like sound had curled up and gone to sleep. The path faded, and he found himself walking not on a trail, but guided only by instinct and the faint tug of the map in his coat pocket. The valley was quiet in an ancient sort of way. Not lifeless, no, but slow. Every tree moved with a patience that didn't belong to this century. Every blade of grass swayed like it was remembering something. And above it all, the sky had a gentle haze, as if twilight never fully left this place. He passed stones covered in lichen, some shaped just oddly enough to seem as though once long ago they had been carved. A crescent moon here, a circle within a circle there. Each felt familiar, like the fragments of a half-remembered dream. The deeper he walked, the more the landscape softened. Hills dipped like whispers. A small stream murmured nearby, winding lazily across smooth black stones, and he paused by it. The water was so clear it was nearly invisible, save for the moon-like shimmer dancing atop it, even though the sun was still rising behind the clouds. That's when he saw her. Not directly. Just a shape. At first, Elias thought it was a trick of the light. But then he blinked, and the figure was still there across the stream, standing among a ring of ancient trees whose trunks were silvered and pale like bones. A girl no older than 10, barefoot, wearing a dress the color of dusk. Her hair was long and black, her skin pale as the moon's own reflection. She watched him not with fear, but with a quiet curiosity, as if she had been waiting a very long time and was relieved he'd finally arrived. Elias opened his mouth, but no words came. The girl raised one hand, not a wave, not a warning. Just a pause, a moment, and then she turned and disappeared among the trees. Something in him stirred. It wasn't urgency. There was no fear. Only the overwhelming sense that if he followed, something lost would be found. He crossed the stream, his steps careful and quiet. The water lapped at his boots, but there was no chill, only the soft resistance of moving forward. Beyond the silver trees, the world shifted. Not physically, not in a way he could name. The light dimmed, though no clouds covered the sky. The air grew thicker, though it was not hard to breathe. And the sounds, what little there had been, faded into something softer still. And then he saw it. The garden was sunken slightly, nestled in the middle of the forest like a hidden bowl. Moss carpeted the ground, and there were no flowers, only leaves in shades of silver, gray, and the deepest green. It was beautiful in a quiet, deliberate way. Nothing about it tried to impress. In the center was a stone bench shaped like a crescent moon. Carvings lined its edge symbols in a language Elias did not know but somehow understood, not word by word, but in meaning. He sat. The bench was warm beneath him, as though someone had just left it. For a long time he listened, and the longer he listened, the more he heard. Not voices, not birds, but echoes. The memory of sound. A lullaby hummed by someone long gone. The distant creak of temple doors. The laughter of a child that lingered in the stones. It was not frightening. It was gentle, full of longing, but not sadness. A soft grief, a patient hope. He closed his eyes and breathed in, and then the girl was beside him. She did not speak. She only opened her hand. Inside it was a stone round, black, smooth, and carved with a shallow crescent. She offered it to him with the same calm gravity of someone handing over a key. He took it. The moment it touched his palm, a breath of wind stirred the trees. Not a breeze from the sky, but a sigh from the earth. And beneath it, he felt the pulse of something. Not a sound, not a tremor, just a presence. The temple was near. The girl was gone again. No footprints, no rustle of grass, just absence. Elias stood slowly, the crescent stone warm in his palm. He placed it into the satchel the innkeeper had given him, and as he did, something else inside shifted. A paper he hadn't noticed before. He opened it carefully. A third piece of the map. This time, the ink was red gold, shimmering like copper under sunset light. The line now curved eastward, toward the hills, toward a symbol shaped like a circle within a crescent. And beneath the symbol was one word. Breathe, Elias walked. Each step was unhurried. Each moment held its own silence, its own pause. The world around him no longer felt like earth and forest, but memory and dream. He was not walking through the world. He was walking through a story. And though he had no idea how it would end, it felt like he had already been here long ago and had simply forgotten. Elias stepped beyond the grove of pale-barked trees, the quiet moss giving way to firmer ground. The stream that had murmured beside him for so long was gone, now vanished behind a wall of silver-leafed ferns and shadowed trunks that faded into mist. He didn't look back. Ahead, the hills rose gently in soft, undulating swells, as if the land itself were asleep under a velvet blanket. The air was cooler here, thinner, and the clouds had grown denser, obscuring the light and tinting everything in bluish gray. It was day, but the sky looked starless, not dark, not stormy, just empty. A vast, colorless dome that hovered without presence. It felt as if something or someone had gently turned down the brightness of the world. He climbed slowly. There was no trail now, just the curve of the land and the soft whisper of the wind in his ears. The third piece of the map guided him. It had no words, only symbols, a crescent cradling a circle, and a series of dots that formed a gentle spiral. At the center of that spiral was a small sigil, a doorway, or a mouth. As Elias climbed, his breathing grew shallower, not from exertion, but from awe. The silence here was not stillness, but breath, slow, rhythmic, as though the hills themselves were alive and sleeping. Each rise and fall of the land mirroring an inhale, an exhale. The stones beneath his feet grew smoother, darker. Some were etched barely with shallow grooves and moon-shaped indentations. Others had worn depressions that matched the size of cupped hands or closed eyes. It felt as though others had walked this path before. Not many, but enough to leave traces of presence, like dreams pressed into the folds of a pillow. By midday, or what would have been midday in a sky that bothered with sunlight, he reached a plateau. It stretched out flat and wide, a pale granite shelf that dropped away into mist on three sides. At its center was a single tree, leafless, silver-gray, its trunk twisted as though shaped by wind or thought. At its base lay a stone basin. Water shimmered inside, still as glass, untouched by wind or ripple. On the surface, a reflection shimmered, not of Elias, not of the sky, but of stars. Dozens of them, clustered into a spiral that pulsed slowly with dim silver light. He leaned closer, and as he watched, the stars rearranged. Not chaotically, but purposefully, like a story being rewritten. A new pattern formed, one he almost recognized. And then he heard the voice. It was not loud. It did not come from the sky or from within him. It came from beside the tree, though no one stood there. The voice was neither male nor female. It was old, but not tired. Clear, but weightless. It said, "You are close to the place where memory ends." Elias didn't speak. He only listened. Few come this far. Fewer still remember why. He opened his mouth to ask, but again the voice continued before he could form words. "You carry silence in your hands. That is enough." The reflection in the basin shimmered once more, shifting into a slow-motion swirl. The crescent stone in Elias's satchel grew warm, humming against his side like a heartbeat. The path continues downward, beneath, between. Not all darkness is empty, and the voice was gone, not vanished, Just finished. Elias stood in the hush that followed, unsure how much time had passed. The tree no longer shimmered. The basin was dry. But at the edge of the plateau, where before there had been only mist, there now stood a stair. It was not carved. It was not built. The steps were shaped from the rock itself worn smooth by centuries of passage or intention. They led down, into mist, into quiet. Elias hesitated only briefly before placing one foot upon the first step. A hum greeted him, not a sound in the air, but in his bones. A low resonance that deepened with each step, like being slowly tuned to the frequency of the earth itself. With every descent, the sky above dimmed further, and still no stars, just pale vapor clinging to the edge of vision. And then black, not sudden, but certain. He stepped into it like water, the darkness swallowing him gently, until only the memory of light remained behind his eyes. There were walls now. He could not see them, but he felt them. Massive, curving, carved from silence and stone. The air was not cold, but it held a presence thick, ancient, patient. A faint glow pulsed along the floor, lines of silver that traced spirals and crescents into paths that led somewhere unseen. He followed, trusting the gentle light to guide him. And then the whispering began. Not one voice, many, thousands perhaps, but none were sharp, none were frightening. They wove together like wind through trees, like pages turning in a library too old to remember names. They spoke in fragments. He has come, not since the silver flood. The silence chooses. He listens. He remembers. He forgets. Elias walked carefully, reverently, the path widening into a chamber that glowed faintly from above. And there, at its center, sat an object. It was shaped like a dome, no taller than his knees. Its surface shimmered like wet obsidian, and within it, movement, not reflection, not shadow, but memory. He saw flashes. A child beneath a great oak, whispering stories into the night. A woman walking in moonlight, singing without sound. A stone temple, crumbling yet alive. His own hands, older than now, placing something beneath the earth. The dome pulsed softly, and Elias knew this was the memory of the temple, not the temple itself. This was its dream, a place of waiting, of preparation. He knelt, and he listened. Elias remained kneeling before the dark dome, his breath soft and even. The air inside the chamber was thick with quiet, not oppressive, but deep like water that had forgotten how to ripple. He watched the shifting surface of the stone before him. It shimmered gently, not like glass or metal, but more like the inside of a dream fluid, unhurried, unbothered by the passage of time. The images within came slowly, first as flickers, then as slow blooms, unfolding like petals of memory. He saw the temple not as ruin, not as mystery, but whole, standing tall beneath a sky that shimmered with stars not yet named. Its pillars were wide and curved, shaped like crescents stacked atop one another, and at the very center was a well of shadow-deep, circular, pulsing with quiet light. Figures moved within, not clearly, only outlines. They wore robes made of thread that shimmered like moonlight on deep water. Some knelt, some circled the central pool. None spoke, and none had faces. Yet Elias knew he had seen them before, not in this life, but somewhere inside his sleep, as a child perhaps, or during the quietest moments between waking and dreaming, when the mind touches things it can't explain. He reached out and placed his hand gently on the dome. The moment his fingers touched the surface, the room dimmed further. Not into darkness, but into something more ancient, something like memory given shape. He felt a tug not on his body, but on his mind. A sensation of slowly leaning backward into a deep, warm pool. And then he was no longer in the chamber. Not entirely, not fully. He stood in a vast open space, a temple whole around him. The air hummed softly. Pale light from an unseen moon spilled across the stone floor. He wasn't alone. Before him stood a woman. Her robes were gray, embroidered with fine silver thread that formed constellations he didn't recognize. Her hair was the color of smoke, long and braided down her back. Her eyes, though, they were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Not just light, not just color. They shimmered like mirrors, holding a sky older than the world. And she was looking straight at him. "You have remembered," she said, her voice soft and endless, like wind across snow. Elias opened his mouth. He wasn't sure what to say, but the words came as if pulled from a well inside him. "I've seen this before." The woman nodded. "Not with your eyes, not with your body, but you've been here." She stepped closer. There was no sound or movement. No footfall. Only the scent of something familiar like crushed lavender and fire-warmed stone. "You asked to forget," she said. "But forgetting is never permanent. Not where the temple is concerned." He tried to understand. The thoughts came slowly, like shapes forming in fog. "I was here," he said. "In another life?" She tilted her head gently. "Not another. Just an earlier part of this one." The woman motioned toward the pool at the center of the temple. As Elias looked, he saw it was no longer shadow-filled. Instead, a calm silver light glowed from within. Shapes drifted across its surface like fragments of dreams, floating one after another. He approached slowly. As he stared into the water, the woman spoke again. This place was not built to worship. It was built to remember. A vessel, not of stone, but of memory. For those who forget on purpose, and those who forget by accident. Elias stared deeper into the pool. The shapes sharpened. A boy sitting beside a stream, whispering stories into the water. A woman writing in a journal that never fills. A traveler walking the same path, over and over, unaware it is the same. Each memory felt distant, and yet heartbreakingly familiar. "Why me?" he asked quietly. The woman's voice was gentle. "Because you listened. When the world turned loud, you found silence. When others looked for answers, you remembered questions." She stepped beside him, placing a hand above the water. There is no knowledge more powerful than stillness, and no temple more sacred than the one that forms inside a quiet mind. The light within the pool shifted again. This time, the vision was clear. Elias stood before the temple older, wearier, and holding something in his hands, the same crescent stone he now carried. He placed it into the ground at the base of the tree on the plateau above. And then, with one final glance over his shoulder, he walked away. The image froze. The woman turned to him. "That was the first time you left, and now you have returned." But nothing returns unchanged. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from understanding, from recognition. "I buried it," he whispered, "so I wouldn't remember." She nodded. And now you must choose. Do you want to remember again? Elias didn't answer immediately. He listened to the pool, to the dome, to the quiet heartbeat of the temple around him. And then he nodded. Yes, the chamber flickered. The memory receded. Elias found himself once more kneeling before the dome, his hands still resting on its surface. But something had changed. His mind felt clearer, not in the way of waking from sleep, but like stepping into a room you didn't know was part of your home. He stood, and at the base of the dome, where before there had been only smooth stone, now sat a single object, a key. It was long and slender, made of a metal that shimmered not gold, not silver, but something in between. Its teeth were shaped like crescent moons. He picked it up carefully. The chamber around him exhaled. A passageway opened silently in the far wall lined with symbols that pulsed gently with silver light. Not a tunnel, not a path. A memory, waiting to be walked. Elias stepped forward, and the door closed quietly behind him. Of course, here is the next section of your long-form, soothing bedtime story. Elias stepped through the opening in the chamber wall, the key still warm in his hand. Behind him, the memory dome faded softly into shadow, and ahead only stillness. The corridor was tall and gently curved, its ceiling arched like the inside of a shell. The walls were not made of brick or block, but of seamless stone etched with symbols shapes like spirals, moons, flowing water, eyes closed in sleep. Each one pulsed faintly, their glow dimming and brightening like breathing. And along both sides, carved into the smooth stone at shoulder height, were names, thousands of them, some written in curling ancient script, others in languages Elias didn't recognize. Some were faded beyond recognition, just the soft echo of a line, like someone had whispered their name into the wall and time had gently erased it, yet they radiated presence. He moved slowly, trailing his fingers across the grooves, and though he read no name aloud, each one stirred something within him, a flicker, a feeling, a memory just beyond reach. These were not tombs. They were remembrances, names given and names forgotten. He paused at one section of the wall where the etching was different. Instead of names stacked in orderly rows, this part spiraled inward toward a single point like a galaxy. The names grew smaller toward the center, more tightly packed, until they vanished into a single word, Aleuri. He felt the breath leave him, not in fear, but in recognition. It was not his name, and yet it had once been. The stone beneath the name felt warmer. His fingertips tingled, and somewhere inside his chest, a door opened, one he didn't know had ever been closed. Suddenly he remembered. A night like this one, a corridor made of thought and silence, and someone himself, but not whispering. If I forget, let the temple remember. He stepped back, hand still pressed to the wall. This place remembered what the world did not. This place remembered him. As Elias continued, he noticed that the corridor was no longer lit only by the etched symbols. Now, above him, pinpricks of pale light began to appear along the arched ceiling stars, dim and shifting slowly, mapping constellations he didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They didn't hold shape as much as emotion memories strung together in light. One cluster shimmered softly, and he saw a field of lavender beneath a sky brushed with violet dusk. Another spun slowly, revealing a pair of hands shaping clay beneath a tree, older than any he had seen. Another pulsed slow and steady, showing a quiet library, books arranged by memory rather than title. Each one familiar, each one his, not just this life, all of them. And then he reached a threshold. The corridor narrowed. Ahead the path dipped, and a low arch formed from crescent-shaped stones blocked further view. Etched above the arch, in soft glowing letters, were 4 words. Elias hesitated, not in fear, but in reverence. He stepped through. The chamber opened like a cathedral carved from sleep. It was vast, circular, domed like the interior of a giant pearl. Along the walls, curved alcoves held statues' figures with blurred faces, cloaked in stillness, each one facing inward toward the center. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, some tall, some child-sized, some seated in meditative stillness. In the center of the floor was a shallow pool of silver mist. Not liquid, not smoke, something in between. As Elias stepped forward, the mist parted, and from its surface rose a ripple of shape, forming slowly into the air. It took on the appearance of him, not as he was. As he had been, younger, standing barefoot in a pale field, eyes closed. Holding nothing, the figure spoke with no sound. And yet Elias heard the words, as if whispered directly to the center of his chest. You asked to be many things. You left those selves behind, but they never left you. One by one, other figures began to rise from the mist, each a different reflection of himself. The scholar, the child, the storyteller, the one who wondered, the one who waited, the one who forgot. They formed a circle around him, eyes gentle, presence soft. We are the parts of you that waited in silence, one said. Until you are ready to remember again, said another. And now you have, said a third. From the center of the pool rose one final shape. It was not a figure. It was a vessel round, translucent, shaped like a tear suspended in air. Inside it, soft glimmers of light moved slowly, drifting like feathers on windless air. Elias stepped forward. The vessel pulsed gently, then opened silently, seamlessly. He reached in and withdrew a small object. A pendant, simple, stone, shaped like a crescent within a circle, the same as the symbol on the map. It felt warm, familiar, like something he had given away long ago and had now, at last, been returned. The selves around him began to fade, each one nodding, not in farewell, but in peace. They did not vanish. They simply became quiet again, waiting. Elias placed the pendant around his neck. As he turned, the corridor behind him had changed. Where once it had sloped downward into stillness, it now curved upward, lit from above with soft golden light. At its top, another archway. Above this one, only one word was etched: awaken. He walked slowly. Each step was light, each breath full. The passage opened into light, not daylight, not torchlight, but something older, something gentle. He stepped through the arch, and the world changed. Elias stepped into a world that felt like breath made visible. The air was golden, not bright, not sharp, but like sunlight filtered through silk, wrapping the landscape in a constant hush. The trees were taller here, thinner, their leaves glowing faintly, as if they remembered light even in shadow. The ground beneath his feet had shifted from stone to something soft moss-like, though paler and smoother, almost like walking across woven starlight. And ahead, on a slight rise beyond the trees, stood the temple. Whole, awake, remembered. Its structure curved upward like petals of moonlight unfolding, open at the top to a sky Elias could not see, but felt. There were no doors, no walls in the traditional sense, only great arcs of stone and silver, reaching upward in perfect harmony. It did not dominate the landscape. It belonged to it. The temple pulsed not with movement, but with presence, as though it had been breathing slowly for centuries, waiting for him to return. And now it had opened its arms. Elias approached. There was no sound, not even the faint whisper of his footsteps. The quiet here was deeper than absence. It was attention. Every leaf, every stone, every arch of silver light seemed to be listening. He crossed under the first archway. Nothing happened. And yet, everything did. A sensation moved through him, warm and slow, like a memory rising from within. Not a thought, not a word, a feeling. Welcome. It did not come from a voice. It came from the place itself. Each arch he passed beneath grew taller, more intricate, though no hand had carved them. The designs pulsed in faint hues: silver, pearl, ash blue, and deep rose. Symbols traced themselves along the curved stone, some from his dreams, others from languages that didn't need names. As he passed the final arch, the path widened into a central circle, and there, in the very heart of the temple, stood a single structure. A shallow bowl of stone, low and wide, filled with water, so still it looked like glass. It reflected no sky, only stars. Elias stepped closer, and as he peered into the bowl, the water shimmered, not with his reflection, but with scenes, not visions of faraway places, but moments from his own life. Small things: a soft rain on a schoolhouse roof, a forgotten melody his mother once hummed while folding blankets, a single sentence in a book that had once changed everything, but he could no longer recall which book or the sentence. A hand he once held too briefly, a letter he never sent. None were painful. They were fragments, wisps of the life he'd lived, the pieces that made the man who now stood in silence, wearing a crescent pendant that glowed softly against his chest. He felt no sorrow, only presence. Each image flickered and faded, replaced by another. The pool didn't judge. It didn't choose Dot, it simply remembered. From the edge of the circle, someone stepped forward. Dot. Elias turned, and there she was again, the woman from the memory chamber, still cloaked in silver gray, still barefoot, her eyes reflecting a sky no longer. Lost, she walked without sound and stood beside the pool, looking into it. "This is where the forgetting ends," she said, "and where the remembering begins again." Elias nodded, his voice low. "I think I understand now." She looked at him, a faint smile touching the corners of her mouth. "You were never meant to carry everything. Only what called you back." He looked down at the water. "So many things I let go." She stepped closer, not invading, only grounding. Letting go is not loss. It is the space in which return becomes possible. From the folds of her robe, she withdrew a final object, a fourth and final piece of the map. It shimmered with both moonlight and shadow, its threads delicate as memory itself. She held it out to him. Elias took it gently. As the cloth touched his fingers, the previous pieces tucked safely in his satchel stirred. A soft warmth loomed through the fabric, and the fragments began to pull toward one another, lifting into the air, joining edge to edge like the quiet closing of a book. And as they merged, The full map revealed itself, that showed no place, no path, only a shape, the crescent and the circle dot overlapping dot, then fading dot, and in their place, the outline of a heart, not an organ, a place, a space dot home dot Elias stood in the temple. As the stars above blinked softly into the daylight sky, the arches behind him glowed for a moment longer, then dimmed dot. He felt no pull to stay, only peace. He turned and walked down the path the way he had come, though the way no longer looked the same. The arches were lower, the moss glowed a little less dot, and in the distance, the light of the dome now closed seemed smaller, softer. He carried no key now no map, only a memory dot, and that was enough dot at the edge of the veil, where the trees thinned and the stones warmed in the sunlight. Elias paused. He looked back only once. The temple was already fading, returning to the veil from which it had called. But something lingered, a shimmer, a note, a feeling. You are remembered. He smiled softly and turned back toward the path. The world was waiting, and so was he awake, quiet, whole. The forest welcomed Elias as he stepped out of the veil. Morning sunlight touched the tops of the trees, and for the first time in days or what felt like days he noticed the wind again. It rustled gently through the high branches, carrying the scent of pine and something softer. Lavender, maybe, or sage warmed by sun. His boots no longer crunched softly with each step they glided. His limbs, though tired, felt lighter, as if some unseen burden had been quietly lifted from his shoulders while he wasn't watching. He paused once, halfway through the forest trail, and looked up at the sky. It was pale blue, scattered with soft clouds, and held no sign of the strange emptiness he had seen before. Temple had disappeared from view, but not from memory, not anymore. He continued toward the village of Marduin with steady steps, his satchel lightly slung over one shoulder, the crescent pendant now resting just beneath his collarbone. It pulsed with a quiet warmth, not glowing, not humming, just present, like a heartbeat. By the time he reached the village square, the sun was high and golden, casting sleepy light over the cobbled streets. Smoke curled from the chimneys. Wooden shutters were pulled open, revealing sleepy faces, some nodding good morning, others too lost in their own thoughts to notice him at all. It was as if no time had passed. As if he had stepped out for a walk the day before and was now returning unchanged. And yet everything had changed. He stopped before the crooked little inn where his journey had quietly begun. The sign above the door swayed gently in the breeze. The wren's nest, its paint faded. The carved bird perched as still as ever. The door creaked as he opened it, and the same warm scent greeted him. Wood smoke, thyme, and something baking. He stepped inside. The innkeeper was behind the counter again, her hair pinned back loosely, her sleeves rolled, a well-worn book resting open before her. She looked up as the bell above the door chimed softly. Their eyes met, and she smiled, not the kind of smile reserved for guests or strangers, but a knowing smile, a waiting smile. Elias stepped forward, slow and thoughtful. You knew, he said softly. She nodded once. Of course. He paused. How? She closed her book gently, placing a sprig of dried lavender between the pages as a marker. The temple speaks to all of us in its own way. It whispered about you long before you arrived. She walked around the counter, moving to the hearth. where the kettle already rested, steaming. "You're not the first," she added, "but you're the first in many, many years." Elias sat down by the fire, feeling the warmth reach into his bones. "How long have you been here?" She poured tea into a small ceramic cup. The scent was calming, earthy, and floral. "A long time," she replied, handing it to him. "But time moves differently when you're near the edge of remembering." After a long silence, she stood and walked to a small cabinet near the corner of the room. From it, she withdrew a leather-bound book, old, worn, and wrapped in a thin ribbon. She carried it over to him. "This," she said, placing it gently in his hands, "is the ledger." Elias opened it slowly. Inside were pages and pages of names, each written in the same silver ink as the notes he'd received. Some had dates. Some had none. Some pages were worn thin by fingers. Others barely touched. He turned to the last written page. His name was there. Elias Hart, dated 3 nights prior. He looked up. "You've kept this for everyone?" She nodded. Double quotes for those who came. "For those who remembered. For those who chose to return." She tapped the page beneath his name. "You wrote this yourself before you left." He blinked, puzzled. "Before I left," she smiled softly. "The first time." She walked to the stairs and gestured for him to follow. Elias carried the ledger with him, the soft creak of each step, a comforting rhythm. At the top of the stairs, she opened the same door he had slept behind when he first arrived. The room hadn't changed, but something within it had. A faint glow shimmered from the window pane. On the desk lay a box, small and carved from pale wood. The lid bore the same symbol, the crescent cradling the circle. He looked at her. She nodded again. "It's yours." He stepped forward, set the ledger gently on the bed, and opened the box. Inside was a folded letter. And the mirror. The letter was in his own handwriting. He recognized the curve of the E, the tilt of the lines. "If you are reading this, then you remembered again. You came here before, years ago, or perhaps a lifetime ago. You asked the temple to let you forget, and it did. But now you've come back not because you had to, but because your heart was ready to hold what it once released. The journey was always circular, not a return, but a remembering. Take the mirror, look into it, but not to see your face. Look to see what's still inside you. You are not the man who arrived, and you never will be again." With stillness, he lifted the mirror from the box. It was simple, oval, framed in soft wood that shimmered faintly in the light. He tilted it toward himself. At first, he saw only his face, tired, weathered, lined by both years and wonder. But then, the surface changed. Behind his reflection, something emerged. The temple. The child by the stream. The girl in the veil. The selves he had met. The selves he had left. And through it all, the same soft thread, silver and eternal. Silence. Stillness. Memory. He set the mirror down slowly, reverently. The room no longer felt like a guest room. It felt like a part of him. Back downstairs, the fire crackled softly. The innkeeper had refilled his tea. She didn't ask what he saw. She didn't need to. He took the cup, cupped it gently, and looked toward the window. The light outside had begun to soften, the golden hour settling gently over the rooftops. Elias took a long sip. The tea was warm. Familiar. And as the sun dipped below the hills, he smiled, not because he was finished, but because he had finally come home. The last of the light spilled across the wooden floorboards of the inn as Elias sat quietly by the fire. The tea, now only a faint warmth in his chest, had settled him deeper into a stillness he hadn't known he carried. The satchel lay beside him, gently worn from the road, and on the table sat the mirror, turned face down. The inn was quiet, not silent, just gently hushed, like a room that knew not to disturb the thoughts of those within it. The innkeeper had long since disappeared into the kitchen, or perhaps to her own room upstairs. She had left him alone, not out of coldness, but with the comfort of someone who trusted that quiet was sometimes the kindest. Company. The fire crackled in a low rhythm, and just when Elias was ready to close his eyes and let sleep carry him away, he saw it. One of the hearthstones near the base, where the bricks met the floor, was not quite even. A corner of something peered out from beneath it, a folded edge. Elias leaned forward slowly, gently lifting the stone with both hands. It wasn't heavy, just old. Beneath it, nestled in a small hollow, was a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, but untouched by ash or soot. He reached for it carefully, unfolded it. The paper was brittle, but the ink still held a soft, silvery gray, like the glint of light on water. The handwriting wasn't his, but it was familiar, and the message was addressed to him. Elias, if you are reading this, then you have walked the path again. You have listened to the silence. You have entered the temple. You have remembered. I wrote this during my second return, when I first understood what remembering truly meant. The journey is not a line, and not even a circle. It is a spiral. We return not to repeat, but to deepen. Each time you come back, you bring more of yourself. You carry less weight, yet more truth. One day, you may not need to come back at all. But if you do know this, you are never alone in the remembering. Even when it feels like silence is all that remains, there are others like us, quiet walkers, gentle seekers, listeners. You are part of something timeless, and the temple is always listening. He stared at the final signature, just a single letter. E. Not Elias. Not Eliari. Not a name. Really. Just a shape. A mirror of his own name. Or maybe someone else's. Or maybe someone he was becoming. He folded the letter slowly, his fingers careful and deliberate. The paper no longer felt old in his hands. It felt current. Present. It felt like it had waited for him. He reached into the space where the letter had been and found, tucked against the back wall, a small object, a coin. It wasn't currency, at least not of any kind he'd ever seen. It was made of stone, perfectly round and engraved on both sides. On one, the symbol of the temple, the crescent wrapped around the circle. On the other, a sleeping eye, its lid gently closed in peaceful rest. He turned it over again and again. The weight was calming. Final. Asterisk, and yet open, like a period that curved gently into a comma. He slipped the coin into the satchel, alongside the pendant. The flames in the hearth were lower now, casting long shadows along the floor and ceiling. The letter lay beside the cup, still warm. From his fingers, Elias leaned back in the chair, feeling its wooden curve support his spine. He closed his eyes, and for a long while, he simply breathed. No dreams came. No visions. Just quiet, and the sense that nothing needed to be done. Not yet. When the fire had turned to embers, he rose and climbed the stairs slowly. The room was unchanged. The mirror still rested on the desk. The ledger remained closed, the ribbon marking the last page dot, but on the pillow now sat a small, folded cloth dot, the same kind that had once carried the pieces of the map. He picked it up and opened it. Inside was a note dot short, simple. If you return again, look beneath the lantern. Her no name, just her. He didn't need more dot, he understood. Somehow, the innkeeper had always known when to say goodbye, and when not to. He placed the cloth beneath the mirror, then turned down the covers, eased himself into the bed, and pulled the blanket over his chest dot, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, he slept without needing to search dot when Elias woke. The light was already spilling through the curtains, soft, golden, and unhurried. It was the kind of morning that felt like it had waited for him, holding its breath so he could rest just a little longer. The bed was warm, the pillow gently sunken beneath his head. He lay still for a moment, listening. No voices, no footsteps. Just the faint crackle of a fire downstairs and the steady rhythm of wind brushing past the eaves. He rose slowly, stretching. The pendant at his chest shifted slightly, cool against his skin. Everything in the room was as he had left it the night before. Mirror, the ledger, the folded cloth that once carried the map, but something tugged at his thoughts. A thread, a note. In the back of his mind, if you return again, look beneath the lantern. He turned toward the small brass lantern that sat on the windowsill. The wick inside was dark long extinguished, but the glass was clean, and the flame-scarred base still bore soot from years of quiet use. He reached under it carefully, and there it was, small depression in the windowsill, no larger than a coin set tucked in shadow. He pressed gently, feeling a soft click beneath his fingertips. The far wall made a sound, a breath, a shift. He turned. The paneling to the right of the wardrobe had changed. What once looked like ordinary wood grain now had a seam, barely visible. A thin vertical line, outlined with a soft glow. He stepped closer, placed his hand on it, and the seam opened soundless, effortless into a door that hadn't been there before. A room hidden waiting the space beyond was not large, but it felt vast. Walls of pale stone lined with shelves, not of books but of memories. Tiny boxes, vials, scraps of parchment, feathers, coins, dried flowers, curled leaves, crystals that hummed faintly when he neared them. Each object rested in a carved nook. Each one pulsed, not with light, with presence. He walked slowly along the perimeter, running his fingers along the edge of a shelf. Each item seemed both unknown and familiar, like something from a dream he hadn't had yet, or perhaps had long ago, but had chosen to forget. He stopped in front of a shelf that bore a small wooden carving, a bird mid-flight. The wood was aged, the wings worn smooth from time. He reached for it, and the moment his fingers touched it, he remembered a long ago day. A hillside, sunlight in his hair, knees muddied, carving the shape with a dull blade beneath an old oak tree. He had been young, not this life, but another, and he hadn't been Elias then. He had been someone else, someone who carved birds to remember the feeling of freedom. He had given the carving to someone, a girl with storm-colored eyes and laughter like falling leaves. And she had told him, even when you forget your wings, this will remember them for you. The memory faded gently, not with pain, but with peace. He placed the bird back in its cradle, and the carving glowed faintly, like gratitude. Near the far corner of the room, a desk, not ornate, just old, functional. On it sat a thick journal, unbound, its pages tied with ribbon the color of ash and sky. He untied it gently and opened to the first page. The ink inside shimmered faintly. This room remembers what the world does not. It is not a secret. It is a kindness. Each object, a memory returned. Each memory, a self once walked and let go. If you find your way here, it means you are ready. Not to carry everything, but to accept what remains. Page after page contained lists of names first. Names only, each followed by a brief description. Leora, silver thread tied around a branch. Remembers the night she sang to the stars. Thane, worn leather button. From a child's coat. Remembers his father's last laugh. Alieri, hollow stone with a hole. Remembers the sound of rain on the first night. Alone. The names were soft. Unassuming. But they hummed with presence. They belonged here. And so did he. At the center of the room sat a pedestal. Simple. Round. And on it a box. His name carved into its lid. Elias. No flourish. No title. Just truth. He reached for it, hands steady. The lid opened easily. Inside was a folded scrap of cloth, worn and faded. He lifted it to his nose. The scent struck him immediately. Lavender, firewood, ink, memory of the innkeeper's tea. He closed his eyes. A rainy evening, a sane chair by the fire. A much younger him, different life, different time sitting beside the innkeeper, asking, "Do you ever miss it?" She smiled gently. "I remember it. That's enough." And she handed him the cloth. "Someday you'll come back when you're ready, and this will bring you home." He opened his eyes. The cloth pulsed faintly, and then it was still. He folded it again, placed it back in the box, closed the lid. As he stepped out of the room, the door gently eased itself shut behind him. No sound, no latch. Just a closing whisper. He turned to look, but the seam was gone. Only a wall now, only wood, but the weight of what was behind it remained in his chest like a stone polished, smooth by water and time. He sat again by the desk, looked out the window. Marduin was still there, quiet, peaceful, an unchanged. But Elias had changed. Or maybe he had simply remembered who he had always been. Elias remained by the window for a long while, elbows resting gently on the sill, the curtain pulled halfway aside. Outside, the village of Marduin moved at its own careful pace. Children chasing one another along the far edge of the square. A man sweeping the stoop of the bakery. A dog lying in the sun, half asleep but alert to any passing feet. It was a world so ordinary, so grounded, and yet it shimmered slightly now, as if the veil between what was seen and what was sensed had grown thinner. Or perhaps Elias had simply grown quieter inside, more able to feel what was always there. The pendant resting beneath his shirt was warm, its weight now familiar, like a part of him that had always belonged. He rose from the desk slowly and crossed. The room. The room behind the hidden door, the room that wasn't there before, was gone. At least for now, but the memory of it lingered in the air like wood smoke and soft laughter. Elias placed the cloth from the box into his satchel, not as a keepsake, but as a thread, one more reminder that the path did not end here. It was only changing direction. Downstairs. The inn was quiet. The fire had been refreshed, new logs crackling softly within the hearth. A plate of warm bread and cheese had been left on the counter, alongside a small note that simply read, "For your walk." H. No name, just the letter, but he smiled anyway. The note's handwriting was curved and neat, unmistakably hers. He wrapped the bread in a napkin, tucked it into the side pocket of his satchel, and opened the front door of the inn. The sun was lower now, not yet dipping below the hills, but edging gently toward the golden hour. A kind of light that painted everything it touched in quiet amber. Elias didn't think about where to go. His feet already knew. The same path he had followed when he arrived in Marduin days before, up past the edge of the village, beyond the line of hedges, into the meadow that opened into the hills. But this time, he wasn't following a map. He wasn't chasing mystery. He was walking into stillness. Birdsong filled the air, not loud, not frantic, just rhythmic. A wood thrush here, a distant finch there, the occasional rustle of wind through dry grass. He passed a tree he hadn't noticed before, twisted slightly, branches shaped like outstretched arms. He paused beneath it and remembered the first time he'd truly stopped looking for answers. Asterisk at the crest of the hill, the world opened wide. A broad meadow unfurled before him. Wildflowers tangled in soft pastel clusters, lavender, bluebell, tiny white blooms that caught the light like glass. The wind pressed through them gently, moving in long waves like a tide made of grass. He sat down on a flat stone, warmed by the sun, and pulled out the bread. As he ate slowly, the village behind him slipped into soft shadow. Smoke curled from chimneys. A child's laugh rang out, drifting across the distance before fading into quiet. And in the middle of it all, he felt time stop, not in an unnatural way, but in the way it sometimes does when nothing is expected and everything is allowed. Without looking, he sensed it. A presence, not human. Not ghost, something between. Like the idea of someone sitting beside him. A version of himself, perhaps. Or the girl from the veil. Or the woman from the temple. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He only shared the moment with the invisible. The quiet, the remembering. A single phrase came into his mind, unspoken but clear. "You can return without leaving." He let the words settle. There would be other journeys, other silences, other times when he would forget and perhaps remember again. But the temple did not live in a place. It lived in the pause, in the breath, in the walk before dusk. When the world was still and the light turned everything into memory. The sun kissed the tops of the hills as Elias stood. The pendant at his chest glowed faintly, catching the last of the light. He turned toward the village, toward the fire, toward the room where a journal waited, still tied in ribbon. His steps were slow, but steady. He did not hurry. He no longer needed to. The walk home was not an ending. It was a remembering, a return to stillness, and the soft echo of his own footsteps in a world that now felt more like a part of him. The last of the sun had vanished behind the hills by the time Elias returned to the village. The sky was a canvas of deep blue, washed gently with the first few stars, each one blinking into view like a slow intake of breath. Inn's windows glowed softly from within, their golden rectangles painting warm reflections across the stone steps. Lamps had been lit, casting halos on the wood-paneled walls. The wren's nest was just as he had left it, but as he stepped inside, It felt subtly different, not in the way of changed furniture or scent, but in atmosphere, not like a room that knew. A secret, and was glad to hold it quietly. Elias ascended the stairs with slow footsteps, fingers trailing along the banister. The wood was smooth from generations of use. He reached his room and paused at the door. The mirror still rested on the desk. The cloth-wrapped satchel sat on the chair, and on the bed, resting neatly across the pillow, was the ledger, unopened. But, untied, the ribbon lay beside it, loose and waiting. He stepped in, closed the door gently behind him, and sat at the desk. The room exhaled. Asterisk. He opened the ledger carefully, the spine creaking ever so slightly as it yielded. The pages turned like whispers, each one humming faintly with the stories it held. He passed familiar names, the ones he had seen before. He passed pages with lines scrawled in languages he couldn't read, but felt like lullabies from old lives. And then he reached the final blank page. Except it wasn't blank anymore. His name was written at the top. Elias Hart. Beneath it, a line, returned again, with stillness in hand. Remembered without seeking, listened without asking. Left nothing behind. There was room for one more entry. His own. Not written by the innkeeper. Not added by some unseen guardian, but left open, waiting. A pen rested beside the ledger, smooth, wooden, the nib finely shaped and shining in the lamplight. He dipped it into the inkwell without hesitation, and wrote, walked the spiral and did not fear its curve. The temple did not give me answers. It gave me silence. And in that silence, I remembered the question. I am no longer seeking. I am listening. If you find this, I was once here too. Perhaps we met. Perhaps we were the same person, divided only by forgetting. The temple remembers you, even when you don't. E. He set the pen down beside the ink, exhaled slowly, and closed the ledger. Not with finality, but with peace. He reached for the ribbon. It was soft in his hands longer than he remembered, dyed a pale blue-gray like fog before morning got as he picked it up. He noticed something new. Embroidered into the edge of the fabric was a thin line of text, so small it could only be read. With the ribbon stretched taut, when this thread unravels, memory returns in pieces. Tie it only when you're ready to let go again. He smiled. Softly. And placed the ribbon back into the drawer. He would not tie the ledger shut this time. Let it breathe. Let the next name arrive. Let the story stay open. Just as he stood, a soft knock touched the wood. He opened the door. The innkeeper stood there, holding a candle. Her face was calm. Her eyes shimmered, reflecting some unspoken joy, or perhaps pride. She looked past him to the desk. You found the record, she said. He nodded. It was waiting. They always are. He gestured toward the ribbon. Did you leave the message? She shook her head. I've never read it. He blinked. But it's there. She smiled. Warm and quiet. It wasn't written for me. A pause. Then, with a tilt of her head, she asked, would you like to join me downstairs? There's something in the fire I think you should see. The common room was empty, except for the innkeeper and Elias. A kettle steamed gently on the edge of the stone hearth, and a new log had been added to the fire, casting long golden shadows along the beams of the ceiling. She motioned to the hearth. Itself, a low box sat inside the recess, pushed into the ashes, protected by a blackened iron grate. She pulled it forward gently with a fire hook. It was made of metal, not wood, carved into the lid, the symbol of the temple. Elias looked at her. "I found this," she said, "the first time I chose to stay behind. Before I became the keeper. Before I remembered what my name meant." She lifted the lid. Inside were scrolls narrow, each tied with a ribbon of a different color. One was blue-gray. She handed it to him. Elias untied the scroll, slowly. The parchment was newer than he expected. Fresh. Unsigned ... He looked at her. "It's for you," she said. "It's yours to write next time." He nodded slowly, not because he planned to return, but because he now understood. The temple didn't end in the veil. It ended here. In rooms, tucked behind wood and silence. In the FIREHT. In. The ledger. In a walk before dusk. And a scroll left blank, waiting not for a name, but for a voice. The room was bathed in golden light as the scroll sat open in Elias's lap, blank but warm, its edges curling slightly as the fire crackled nearby. The innkeeper sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a small ceramic cup of tea. She didn't speak, and Elias found he didn't need her to. Some conversations were held in silence. The fire didn't need tending. The tea didn't need stirring. Everything that was present was enough. And Elias knew without being told that this evening marked something important. A moment neither destination nor beginning. A soft pause at the edge of transformation. He looked down at the scroll. Again, still blank. But full, like a canvas that already held its story in the space between fibers. After a long stretch of companionable silence, the innkeeper finally spoke. Her voice was soft, not hesitant, but gentle with the weight of time. "I used to believe the temple was a place you visited only once, like a pilgrimage, a rite. But the truth is, you don't find the temple just once in your life. It finds you again and again, in different forms." She looked into the fire, eyes reflecting the movement of flame like starlight caught in water. For some, it's a forest path. For others, a room they've never noticed before. A sound, a pause, a name spoken aloud for the first time in years. She smiled faintly. "For me, it was a dream I had as a girl. I followed a white wren through a mirror. When I woke, I drew the symbol on the window pane with my breath. I didn't know what it meant. Not then." Elias didn't speak. He only listened. She continued. "Years passed. I traveled. I forgot. Then one day, I came here to this village, just passing through. I stayed the night. And the innkeeper at the time, she handed me a ribbon just like the one you found." Her smile deepened. She didn't say much. Only, "If you find your way back, you'll know what to do." Elias nodded slowly. Now he understood. The keepers didn't choose the temple. They remembered it and stayed behind to help others do the same. She reached into her apron and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. A key. Not metal. Stone. Polished smooth, the size of a walnut, shaped in a gentle crescent with a small notch carved in the center. She placed it on the ocean table between them. "This has been passed on," she said, "not like a torch, but like a story. It doesn't open doors. It reminds them." Elias stared at it. It pulsed faintly with warmth, as if remembering every hand it had passed through. "You don't have to take it," she added. "Not yet. Not ever." He didn't move to reach for it. Instead, he looked at her, this woman, who had known his name without asking, who left tea for him by the fire, who remembered without ever needing to explain. "You stayed," he said softly. "You became the keeper." She nodded once. "Do you regret it?" Her answer was immediate. "Not once." Later, upstairs, the firelight behind him, Elias sat at the desk once more. The ledger remained closed, his entry complete. But now, beside it, sat something new. A second book, thinner, unmarked. When he opened it, he found it empty, save for the very first page. "This book does not record what you did. It records what you learned when you listened. Asterisk, write only when the silence gives you something worth keeping." He took the pen again, dipped it lightly in ink, and wrote, "Stillness is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of understanding. He paused. And added, "To keep the temple alive, we do not need to speak of it, only to become it." Before sleep claimed him, Elias descended the stairs one last time that night. The innkeeper had retired. The fire had burned low. And yet a light flickered from beneath the staircase, just faint enough to notice. He bent low and found a door there. Small. Unassuming. He hadn't seen it. Before. It was slightly ajar. Inside. Shelves, scrolls, a tiny bench, a stool, a candle holder shaped like a crescent. He stepped in, ducking his head, and realized it was a keeper's room. Not grand. Not sacred. Just ready. Waiting. He smiled and left it untouched. For now, that night, he slept and dreamed. But no voices called. No figures waited. No temple revealed itself. There was only a field, a sky, and the slow rising of the moon behind him. He didn't turn to look. He didn't need to. It was enough to know it was there. The morning arrived slowly, wrapped in pale mist and birdsong. Marduin had not yet fully stirred. Only the occasional clink of a bucket at the well, or the hush of a broom sweeping dust from a stoop. Elias sat by the window again, cradling a warm cup of tea left quietly at his door. The ledger was closed now, the ribbons still untied. Beside it, the smaller blank journal waited like a page yet to be whispered into. And still, the key from the innkeeper remained on the desk untouched, glowing faintly with the light of stone rather than flame. He felt no rush to decide. It would be there when it was time. He finished the tea, its warmth settling low in his chest like a returning thought, and rose to wash, dress, and open the door to the morning. But when he reached the landing of the stair, he paused, for someone else had already arrived. Soft, deliberate footfalls echoed across the wooden floor below. Not boots, not sandals, but something altogether quieter. Polished. And strange. He descended slowly, each step creaking just enough to make his presence known. As he reached the final step, he saw her. The visitor. She stood by the front counter, facing the window, her back to him. She was tall, draped in a shawl the color of storm clouds, with hair that shimmered like snow under moonlight. And on her feet, gleaming softly even in the low light, were shoes made of silver leather. They caught no dirt. Left no mark. But they did not belong to this world. Not entirely. As if they'd never truly touched the ground. She turned before he could speak, and when she looked at him, she did not smile. She simply nodded, once, slowly. As if she had been waiting. Not for him, exactly, but for someone like him. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and resonant, like a low bell rung in fog. You walked the spiral. He nodded. I did. And now you've paused. He glanced toward the fire, the stair, the innkeeper's door. Yes, he said softly. I'm not sure what comes next. She stepped forward, her silver shoes making no sound, but glinting with each careful movement. That is the beginning. Of keeping? Elias blinked. Keeping? She tilted her head slightly. The temple is not a place. You know this now. It echoes through those who've walked far enough to stop asking why they came. He felt her gaze rest on him like the weight of a gentle book. Some walk away and forget again. That is their gift. Others stay, quietly, softly. They become a doorway for someone else. From beneath her shawl, she withdrew a small book bound in dark fabric and edged in silver. It shimmered faintly, as if it held moonlight between its pages. She handed it to him. The cover bore no title. Inside. The pages were written in many hands, many inks, in many styles, some flowing and cursive, others blocky or childlike. Some were single sentences. Others spanned pages. One near the front read, I waited until the river froze before I remembered my name. Then I left the boots behind. Another, my mother told stories that I only understood after she forgot them. Another, the moment I stopped walking, the temple opened its doors. And yet others were blank pages left between stories. Space made intentionally for what came next. She motioned to the last empty page. If you choose to stay, she said, your story joins theirs. If you leave again, the book remains. It always finds the next one. She placed the book gently on the counter beside a small black feather. Elias looked from the page to her. Do you know the innkeeper? He asked. The woman's gaze softened, almost as if amused. But she didn't answer. Instead, she said, the keeper is not one person. It is a role passed in stillness. The one who listens longest becomes the one who hears what others cannot. She turned toward the door. You may follow, or stay, or forget. All are sacred. But only those who've remembered without asking. She stopped and looked. Back can choose to listen for others. And then, without another word, she opened the door. The silver shoes stepped out into the morning mist, and she was gone. Elias stood for a long while by the counter. The fire had dimmed. The wind whispered softly through the cracks in the window pane. Finally, he reached for the book. He turned to the last empty page, took the pen from the wall shelf, and wrote, I did not plan to stay, but then I stopped asking, and found that silence had made a space for me. I don't remember everything, but I no longer need to. The temple listens, and I am learning to do the same. He closed the book and placed it back on the counter. When he returned to his room, a candle had been lit. The small key still rested on the desk, but beside it now sat a second cup of tea. And beneath the saucer, a small slip of parchment. When the silver shoes return, someone is always ready to hear H. Elias. Sut lifted the cup. And watched the candle flicker in rhythm with his own slow breath. The candle beside Elias burned low, but never fully diminished. Its flame flickered steadily, without urgency, like it knew its purpose was not to light the room, but to mark time. He sat beside it quietly, the cup of tea warming his hands, watching how the soft glow danced on the window glass, drawing golden halos around the edges of the glass. The village below had gone to sleep. Even the dogs no longer barked. Even the wind, so often alive in the hills, had paused. A hush had wrapped around the inn, and the stillness was more than silence. It was listening. It was waiting. Elias rose from the desk and wandered the room slowly, his fingers brushing the wood grain of the walls, the folds of the curtain, the edges of his satchel. His hand paused along the back wall beneath, the beam that framed the bed, where his fingertips caught something rough, a scratch just beneath the varnish. He knelt to see it more clearly in the candlelight. It was a symbol barely visible, as if someone had once etched it lightly and forgotten it. A circle with no break and no opening. No edge. Just a curve that turned endlessly into itself. Loop, but not a perfect one. At its base was a hollow, a space where something once might have opened. Or closed. He ran his thumb over it, slowly. And then he felt the cool draft. The wall beside the etching shifted softly beneath his hand. Not mechanically. Not magically. Just softly. As if it had always meant to move for him, but was waiting for the right kind of stillness in his breath. The panel gave way, sound less lie. And a new opening revealed itself. Not a stairway, not a room, just a passage. Narrow. Dark, and at the end of it, a door. Simple. Made of smooth wood, with no hinges and no handle. Elias stood before it. For a long time, he didn't reach for it. There was nothing to reach for. No latch. No knob. Only the weight of the moment, and the quiet question the door seemed to ask. Are you knocking to enter, or waiting to be invited? He touched the wood gently. It was cool beneath his fingers, but it pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat deep within, and in his chest the pendant responded. He could feel it warming slightly, not demanding anything of him, just responding. He leaned in, pressing his forehead softly against the wood, closed his eyes, and breathed. He didn't enter, not with steps, not with motion, but he was suddenly there. Inside. Or beside, or dreaming. It was a room without light, but not dark. A place without walls, but not empty. He heard breath, not his own, but many. Gentle, human, timeless breath, like a room where others slept, or waited. Or remembered. And among them, the whisper of pages. Soft turning. No hurry, no end. He spoke aloud, not knowing if his mouth moved. I don't need to know everything. And the room responded, without sound. That is how you begin to hold everything. When Elias opened his eyes again, the passage was gone. The scratch in the wood was smooth now, as though it had never been there. And the candle? Still burning, exactly the same height. As though no time had passed. But he knew. It had. Inside him, a space had shifted. Not filled, not emptied. Just realigned. He sat again at the desk, picked up the second journal, the one for listening, and wrote only a single line. The door didn't open. But I did. A figure passed by below. Just a shadow. But he recognized the movement. Silver shoes, just catching the corner of lamplight. Before vanishing into the night. The visitor was leaving. Not just the inn. Not just Mardo Inn, but perhaps leaving. Something behind in him, or taking something with her. And Elias realized she had not left him the key, because he didn't need it. Not anymore. From the hallway outside his door, he heard a knock. Not urgent. Not loud. A single rap. Then silence. But the knock wasn't for him. He knew it the moment he heard it. It was for someone else, Perhaps another guest. Perhaps another future keeper. The story was still continuing, just not on this page. Not in this room, not tonight. Asterisk Elias stood, stretched slowly, and set the second journal on the desk beside the ledger. Both now had writing inside, both now had space, left to fill, but not by force, not by pressure, only by patience. He turned down the blanket, lay back on the bed, and let his thoughts drift like falling leaves on slow-moving water. The temple had not vanished, it had changed shape, and now it lived in a door that did not need to open to remind you of who you already were. Elias woke not to sound or sunlight, but to a feeling, quiet clarity, as if something had settled gently into place inside him overnight. The candle on the desk had finally burned out, leaving a delicate curl of wax near the base of the holder. Outside, the village moved with its usual softness. Distant hooves on cobblestones, the squeak of a window being opened, the rustle of fabric being hung to dry in the early breeze. He rose slowly, aware of the peaceful weight in his limbs. Pendant at his chest was still and quiet now, no longer warm, but no longer cold either, simply present, like breath. When he reached the hallway, he noticed something new. A folded parchment on the floor, just outside his door, no markings. No name, no seal, just waiting. He picked it up and unfolded it carefully, inside. In the same familiar silver ink as before, was a single sentence. You do not need to be known to be remembered. There was no signature, just a small crescent drawn beneath. The final word. He stared at it for a long while before slipping it into the front pocket of his journal, the one meant for listening. Not keeping downstairs. The fire was already lit. A cup of tea waited for him. The innkeeper wasn't in sight, but her touch was everywhere. After tea, Elias wandered over to the hearth to warm his hands, but found something curious beside the firewood basket, a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of folded letters, each wrapped in a ribbon. No addresses, no stamps, some creased and yellowed, others still crisp and pale. Some had names, others only symbols. One, tied with a piece of string and sealed with a wax sun, caught his eye. He opened it gently. Inside, a handwritten note. I've never spoken to her aloud, but she always answers when I boil the tea. It's not the words, it's the water. The silence is where she lives. If this finds you, you're not the only one. Elias closed it slowly and chose another. This one was written in large, slightly clumsy handwriting. I walked until my feet stopped hurting, and only then realized that pain had been carrying me. When it left, I didn't know where to go. That's when I saw the tree shaped like a doorway. I think you've seen it too. If not yet, soon. Another had no words, only a charcoal drawing of a crescent moon resting on the back of a sleeping bird. Elias traced the image with his fingertip, feeling something stir inside his chest, a memory, or maybe a promise. He returned. Upstairs. The ledger still sat on the desk. He opened to his page and noticed, just beneath the line he had written, someone had added a small symbol in ink, a feather, and below it, a line he hadn't written. He knows the quiet is more than an absence. It is a shape, and he carries it well. He didn't know who had written it. Perhaps the innkeeper, perhaps someone who had passed through in the early hours. But it felt like a note left in the margin of his life, and he accepted it gratefully. Later, that evening, as dusk approached and the village dipped into its golden hush, Elias noticed something curious. Letters had begun appearing in odd places, beneath the cushion of the window seat, tucked between the pages of an unused journal, inside the sleeve of his coat, folded into the hem of the tablecloth. Each one carried the same thin colon connection dot, not messages from one person to another, but quiet confirmations echoes. I dreamed of you before I knew your name. I remembered something I never lived, but I miss it anyway. When I stopped needing to arrive, the road stopped hiding from me. Some were only drawings, some were blank, some were just a ribbon tied in a knot. Elias didn't try to read them all. He didn't collect them. He simply noticed. Let them exist, and felt the comfort of knowing that. The temple left traces where it was needed, even when unmarked, unsigned, or unopened. That night, before sleep, Elias found one last letter. It wasn't on paper. It wasn't hidden. It was scrawled gently into the fogged glass of his window. A finger unseen. He leaned close to read the message written in breath. There is nothing you need to do now.